Hey, everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes Podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan, and the podcast, as always, is brought to you by my sponsors. That includes Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops. And also brought to you by Master Packager, an application packaging software that helps you build packages that end users love, enterprises want, and the Windows OS needs. If you enjoy the show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. Microsoft has announced a Windows native update orchestration platform to support all updates on Windows. They claim it will provide developers and product teams building apps and management tools with an API for onboarding their updates that supports the needs of their installers. The orchestrator will coordinate across all onboarded products that are updated on Windows 11, in addition to Windows Update, to provide IT admins and users with a consistent management plane and experience. This process will take into account various factors, including current CPU load, network bandwidth usage, user activity, the device's power status, and overall network conditions. With this, Windows would download any pending updates with minimal interruption to the daily workflow. In the announcement, Microsoft said that developers and product teams that onboard their updates to the orchestrator can take advantage of some benefits, including eco-efficient scheduling, so updates are intelligently deferred based on user activity, system performance, connection to power, and sustainable times to update. I think personally the one being connected to power for those laptops is pretty important, but that's not necessarily an eco-efficient solution. It's more of a user experience and ensuring the update completes at an appropriate time when it's actually powered on. It's not going to fail halfway through because the laptop ran out of power. They'll also provide simplified notification where updates for apps will be able to use native Windows Update notifications. An update history for apps will be able to get viewed in settings, giving users a centralized location to see information about all their application updates. They say they'll provide support for common app packaging types. So the orchestrator will support MSIX AppX and apps with custom implementations such as Win32 apps. So certainly an interesting evolution, and it's probably one that's long overdue. Of course, when it comes to applications on Windows, it's very hard to lead that horse to water and get developers to conform to doing something other than what they're currently doing. So we'll have to wait and see how well this is adopted. And this is now in public preview, so if anyone's interested in trying out the preview, it is available. Last week, it was reported that KB5058405, which is a Windows update in the May updates for Windows 11, 22H2, and 23H2, was having issues installing for some users, with reports that they were seeing an error with the hex code 0xC000098 in the Windows recovery after the update failed to install. The error revealed that the issue is related to a corrupt Windows ACPI.sys system driver. The ACPI, or Advanced Configuration and Power Interface, is part of the processor power management that helps control various power states on Windows meant to run a CPU efficiently. Aside from the error confirmed by Microsoft, users online were running into other issues too, like a different error which was 0x800707E. At the time, Microsoft was saying that home users were unlikely to run into such issues, and they added that the problem was seen primarily on devices running in virtual environments like Azure Virtual Machines, Azure Virtual Desktops, and on-premises virtual machines hosted on Citrix or Hyper-V. Now, fortunately, at the time of recording this, Microsoft has recently released an out-of-band update to address the problem. So if you do have Windows 11, 22H2, 23H2 machines, particularly those virtual machines, like I said, and you're facing this problem, there is an out-of-band patch that you can include in your images to resolve this problem. There were some pretty big announcements in the end-user computing space recently. First up, LoginVSI announced that they have acquired Hydra, which they say is a smarter way to manage your Azure environment. Hydra brings powerful automation, auto-scaling, and centralized visibility and configuration management under one roof. So that kind of management pane for smart management of your Azure Virtual Desktop environment to avoid high consumption costs, simplify things like the image creation process, and overall streamline your Azure Virtual Desktop management. So very interesting. Obviously, we saw that Nerdio that provides some similar capabilities for Azure Virtual Desktop had a very high valuation. So it does make a lot of sense that LoginVSI would try to stake a claim on this. And LoginVSI is also pretty popular with those doing AVD implementations and just these kind of transformative projects in general, because their tooling offers invaluable data and insights for planning those implementations. So it does make sense for them to expand into this type of area. So congratulations to Mr. Muir and all at Hydra, and of course also to all those at LoginVSI. In other acquisition news, it has been announced that IGEL has acquired Stratodesk, and they say that the acquisition will expand IGEL's customer base, accelerating its mission to help enterprises modernize their endpoint strategy with a more secure, cost-effective, and cloud-ready OS. Additionally, we'll add to IGEL's additional expertise in endpoint operating systems, endpoint security, and end-user computing. With this acquisition, they say that IGEL welcomes Stratodesk's customers into a future-ready platform that is deeply integrated with the leading zero-trust management and performance vendors. So maybe just a couple quotes from the press release. First up, it says, quote, "The acquisition reflects IGEL's continued momentum in the endpoint OS platform. Stratodesk customers will benefit from the industry's most secure client OS, endpoint management solution, and our adaptive secure desktop, significantly enhancing their endpoint security, resilience, and cost efficiency." End quote. And that is from Klaus Ostermann, CEO at IGEL. There was also a quote from the CEO of Stratodesk, Emmanuel Perker, saying, quote, "This agreement ensures our customers have access to the most powerful and secure endpoint OS, a future-proof solution as they transition to cloud-driven workspaces. We're confident that IGEL's technology, expertise, and customer-first approach will provide the best possible path forward for our customers and partners." End quote. So very interesting, as Microsoft is kind of dipping their toes into the thin client space with the Windows 365 specific link thin clients. And also, obviously, Amazon, I think it's a couple of years ago, spun out their own Fire-based thin client device as well. And IGEL is a pretty large player in their own regard, and now they're basically buying some competition that's going to increase their customer base even further. It would be interesting to see with the split, say for Citrix and VMware or Omnissa, are they in the market for a thin client vendor themselves? And there's really not that many, I guess, independent thin client vendors left in the space, outside of the large hardware manufacturers. So it'll be interesting to see how this develops further in the thin client space, but there's definitely some changes afoot. Microsoft and CrowdStrike announced a joint effort to map their threat actor naming systems to each other. This does not mean that they will standardize on using just one name for a given cyber gang or incident, but rather they will provide a cheat sheet for decoding the confusing and conflicting names used across the industry. So for example, Midnight Blizzard, well, that's Microsoft's name for what CrowdStrike called Cozy Bear. Others were calling it APT29 or UNC 2452. Microsoft says this is just the beginning, and Google's Mandiant team and Palo Alto Networks Unit 42 are expected to join the project soon. So hopefully things will become a little less confusing in future. Microsoft recently announced greater standardization for the USB-C ports as part of the Windows Hardware Compatibility Program. Microsoft said, quote, "While the USB specifications give PC manufacturers the ability to choose which optional features the port supports, we set out to establish a minimum bar for USB-C port capabilities on PCs." End quote. And that baseline bar means that with Windows 11 laptops, all USB-C ports must provide display support to connect a monitor, PC charging support for power, and of course, data transfer. And that has to meet a certain speed. Furthermore, Microsoft notes that any port which supports USB 40 gigabit per second will work fine with both USB 4 and Thunderbolt 3 peripherals. These updated WHCP requirements have come into play with Windows 11 24H2 according to TechRadar.com, and notebooks running 24H2 will support them. According to bleepcomputer.com, Windows 11's Notepad application is getting a text formatting feature that will support Markdown style input. This new Notepad capability is rolling out to all Windows insiders in the Canary and dev channels who have updated the app to version 11.2504.50.0. And I saw some excitement on social media about this, so if you do want to try it out for yourself, just make sure you're in the insider builds and you have that version. According to Bloomberg, Apple is working on a major rebrand across all of its operating systems, which will be identified by year instead of version number going forward. This means that in 2025, Apple may launch iOS 26, macOS 26, watchOS 26, tvOS 26, and visionOS 26. This rebrand will likely include a new look for Apple OSs too, and it's expected to be talked about at the upcoming Worldwide Developers Conference, which will start on June 9th, so that'll be next week. Microsoft has unveiled Windows Backup for Organizations, a new backup tool for enterprises that simplifies backups and makes the transition to Windows 11 easier, and this was announced actually in November of last year, but now it's entering public preview. You can back up your organization's Windows 10 or Windows 11 settings and restore them on a Microsoft Entra ID joined device. BlueComputer.com suggests the capability helps reduce migration overhead, minimizes user disruption, and strengthens device resilience against incidents. Organizations that sign up for the public preview also need an active Microsoft Intune test tenant and Microsoft Intune service administrator permissions to take full advantage of this feature. It's a bit odd that it's coming now, and they're including the fact that it could be used as a migration solution when Windows 10 end of support is literally just a few months away. But hey, this is a good thing. Like USMT has been dying on the vine for quite some time, so it's good that there's an officially supported Microsoft solution going forward. In what was called a big deal by some on social media, it was announced that Microsoft Windows users in the European Economic Area, which is the EU plus Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway, will have an option to uninstall the Microsoft Store and avoid getting extra nags or prompts asking them to set Microsoft Edge as the default browser unless they choose to open it. Additionally, setting a different browser like Chrome, Firefox, Brave, or something else will pin it to the taskbar unless a user chooses not to. Other changes mentioned by The Verge include automatically enabling third-party apps to add the web search results in Windows Search upon installation, and the option to move search providers around based on user preference. With updates rolling out in early June, the Microsoft Bing app, as well as the widgets board and lock screen, will open web content with the default browser instead. So really enforcing that browser choice and actually respecting the browser choice down to a low level, including down to that widgets board and lock screen, things that might be tightly wound or aligned with the OS, will actually respect a default browser that's not Edge going forward. A shareholder lawsuit with a goal to steer Google away from the kind of anti-competitive practices that got into hot water has been settled by Alphabet with a pledge to spend $500 million over the next 10 years on systematic reforms. The company will have to form a board-level committee devoted to overseeing the company's regulatory compliance and antitrust risk, a rarity for U.S. companies. The group will report directly to the Alphabet CEO, and there will also be reforms at other levels of the company that allow employees to identify potential legal pitfalls before they affect the company. Google has also agreed to preserve communications. Google's propensity to use auto-deleting chats drew condemnation from several judges overseeing its recent antitrust cases that I covered on the podcast. Alphabet, however, does not admit any wrongdoing under the terms of the settlement, but it may have to pay tens of millions in legal fees on top of the promised $500 million investment. Anthropic CEO Daria Modi has voiced concern about potential labor risks lurking about, such as the threat of massive tariffs on imported goods in the US, layoffs intended to undo pandemic-era overhiring, and policies that empower employers at the expense of labor. He appears to believe that policymakers are sugarcoating the possibility of major AI-driven employment disruption, and voiced this concern in an interview last week with Axios amid Code with Cloud, Anthropic's first developer conference. He suggested that employment could reach 10 to 20% in the next 1 to 5 years. I also saw some mainstream media was picking up some claims that Anthropic's Gen AI did some pretty underhanded things when it was threatened with being shut off, which I already covered some of that last week on the podcast where there was a test across different AI services, but this one seemed to get pretty extreme and was not part of that example. I'm not going to get into it in this episode. I might get into it more on next week's episode. It was covered up by mainstream media outlets, but I want to get more sources on that before I dedicate a section to it. But you could probably Google it for yourself. Anthropic Cloud revolts against shutdown. Something like that. Anyway, I digress. Let's move on. In sad news, the Seattle Times reported that Microsoft has laid off 305 employees in Washington, almost 3 weeks after Microsoft cut 3% of the company's staff. So I think this one was a little bit surprising in that there had just been a large round of layoffs, and just within a few weeks, there's another, albeit smaller, round of layoffs. Now, I was using the Seattle Times. If you go to thelayoff.com or even just look at social media, this seems to have affected more than just employees in Washington, though it's unclear what the exact number may be. Yeah, my heart goes out to those affected, and I hope you find new work soon. In more sad news, IBM has reportedly let go of approximately 8,000 workers, with the majority of these layoffs said to be concentrated within the company's HR division. This development follows IBM's recent rollout of AI tools designed to handle duties once managed by HR personnel, resulting in the elimination of approximately 200 jobs. So 200 specifically in HR is the way I read it, according to the Financial Express article. Now, allegedly, despite the layoffs, IBM's total workforce has actually grown, as the savings from automation are being redirected into areas like marketing, software engineering, and sales operations. Well, that's not going to offer any solace to those working in HR or other positions where they lost their jobs. I also wonder, like the cynic in me thinks that perhaps they let people go and they wait a little while and then they rehire for some of those positions on worse terms. Unfortunately, that's one of the dark downsides of capitalism. The UK government's Government Digital Service, GDS, has published the results of a trial involving 20,000 civil servants using Microsoft 365 Copilot. The trial aimed to study the impact of AI assistance by providing 365 Copilot access to these civil servants across 12 different organizations, found that on average, participants in the trial saved 26 minutes per day when using 365 Copilot, which equates to nearly 2 weeks of time annually. Additionally, over 70% of users reported that Copilot reduced the time spent searching for information and performing routine tasks, allowing them to focus on higher value activities. Furthermore, 82% of participants indicated that they would prefer not to return to their pre-Copilot working conditions. So interesting. The searching thing, that's the one thing that I'm very skeptical using AI for. Like, it's cool that it aggregates a bunch of sources quickly, but you definitely need to drill into those sources. And if it does not provide any verifiable sources, do not trust the results. But hey, I'm not saying anything new or revolutionary here. This is what a lot of people are seeing and experiencing and saying. Ars Technica reported that last month, a recent law school graduate lost his job after using ChatGPT to help draft a court filing that ended up being riddled with errors. A court in Utah ordered sanctions after the filing included the first fake citation ever discovered in the state, hallucinated by AI. The filing included multiple miscited cases, in addition to at least one case that does not appear to exist in any legal database. Douglas Durbano, a lawyer involved in the filing, and Richard Bentner, the attorney who signed and submitted the filing, should have verified the accuracy before any court time was wasted assessing the fake citation, according to Judge Mark Couros. Couros wrote, quote, "We emphasize that every attorney has an ongoing duty to review and ensure the accuracy of their court filings," end quote. And he noted that the lawyers fell short of their gatekeeping responsibilities as members of the Utah State Bar when they submitted a petition that contained fake precedent generated by ChatGPT. The law firm the two worked for apologized and promised to make amends to the court. Apologizing and promising to make amends, the law firm told the court that the law school graduate was working as an unlicensed law clerk and had not notified anyone of his ChatGPT use. At the time, the law firm had no AI policy that might have prevented the fake legal precedent from being included in the filing. But after the discovery, the lawyers reassured the court that a new policy had been established, and Bentner's lawyer, Matthew C. Barnick, told ABC4 that the law clerk was fired despite the lack of a formal or informal policy discouraging the improper AI use. The Ars Technica article I referenced went deeper into concerns over use of GenAI chatbots in students, potentially putting too much trust in GenAI, and to a certain degree, switching their brains off and letting AI do the thinking for them. So certainly a concern that was kind of raised very early on when GenAI started to become popular in the mainstream, and it still remains a concern. But now this episode's scripts, tricks, and tips. First up, I saw TechRadar shared an article on 3 viral ChatGPT prompts that will completely change the way you use and think about AI. I don't know if it's that big or significant, but it is an interesting framing of how you prompt Gen AI, so I thought it's worth sharing. And I'll share a link to the article with this episode, which is episode 389, and you'll find that at 5bytespodcast.com. And finally, if you're in Ireland this Thursday, which is June 5th, you can come along to the EUC Ireland barbecue event where I will be doing a session on what's new in Numescent Cloud Pager, and maybe also to promote something else of my own. I haven't been very good about promoting events and stuff that I've been speaking at. I've done an awful lot of them in the last 2 months. But I will also be doing a webinar on June 11th, and I'll share a link with that, or to register for that with this episode. And I'll also be at EUC Forum in Edinburgh. So if you're going to be at EUC Ireland or EUC Forum in Edinburgh, I will see you there. Come by the Numescent booth and say hello. If not, you can check out the webinar that's on June 11th. Well, that's it for this episode of the podcast. As always, thank you so much for listening.